I specialized in crude toxins and poisons. And so my target was a guy named Zarqawi, but he's the founder of ISIS. Presidential administration came in to our vault where we worked, saw the chart and said he wanted a chart. And that chart the next day was used by Colin Powell on the floor of the UN to make the case to go to war in Iraq. And the chart was changed. Our chart started the Iraq War. I thought I knew why terrorists became terrorists. And boy, was I wrong.
I mean, I find when I interview people that a lot of times like their upbringing will kind of guide their career path. So were your parents in law enforcement or nothing like that? No?
No, my upbringing is a little different. So I think like kids these days have a lot of pop culture available to them, right? Like Criminal Minds, Homeland, right? Like all those shows that I know are really popular. But, you know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and we didn't have any of that. And so I did not really fully understand or know what the CIA was, to be totally honest with you. And I think, not to be kind of rude, but like, why would I? It wasn't in front of my face, like I think it is now, to kind of the 30 and under set, if you will. But so no, for me, I never. My dad's my dad was a college professor, and my mom was a banker. So I did not grow up at all wanting to have this career.
So if it was in the 70s and 80s, because that's kind of, you know, when I grew up, like, I mean, the Cold War was like Ronald Reagan, you know, in the 80s. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
I was at least totally aware of the Cold War. Like,
Oh, no, me too.
I remember one time the oh gosh, Time magazine had come out and they had an article and it was showing all of the Soviets had like 10 tanks, or whatever, like 6 tanks to every one of our tanks. They had like 2 airplanes for every one of ours. They had, you know, there were 2 men in their military and I was like, and I remember going to my dad and being like, look at this. Did you see this? Like, isn't this scary? And my dad said, yeah, but they don't work. He's like, you know, and you know, but I was aware of the Cold War. I don't know about the CIA or what they did. I think
Exactly.
probably I got more interested in the CIA when I started watching James Bond movies.
So that was the opposite for me. It actually had the opposite effect. So obviously, yes, Cold War was like a thing. I mean, I remember the Berlin Wall coming down, trying to get a piece of it. I don't know if you remember that at all,
Yeah.
but like that was like a thing. But for me, it's not that I didn't care about Russia and the Cold War. I definitely did. I don't think it sparked like a passion in me, if that makes any sense. And so at the time, that's what the CIA did. That was their area of focus and area of interest, which obviously makes complete sense. But then you have to understand, you're a dude, right? I'm not. And
Right.
so my brother was into James Bond. My dad was into James Bond, but all I saw was this old guy, Sean Connery. Like I didn't see myself in that. And so it was completely uninteresting to me. So it's interesting how we all perceive it in different ways, depending on like who we are. And so I never thought, why would I join the CIA and like with all these kind of crusty older dudes? Like why would that be something I would do? Right.
Right.
Because I didn't see myself in it, which is fine. It just wasn't, I don't know. It wasn't something that I had always wanted to do. I thought all they did was work Russia. I thought it was all a bunch of guys. And it just, I don't want to say I wrote it off. I just was like, okay. I mean, I was interested in international affairs. I majored in history, but it didn't, my pivotal moment didn't come until like 1997. And by that point, I was already a freshman or sophomore in college. I don't remember.
I was gonna say, so you weren't 7 years old in front of the class and everybody else wanted to be a ballerina and you said CIA.
No, I wanted to be a high school history teacher.
Really? Okay.
Mhm. That's what I wanted to be. And that's what I went to college to be. I went to the same college. My dad was a professor. I got free tuition, so it was wonderful.
Nice.
I majored in history, joined a sorority, like did all the things. So that's why I'm always very transparent about how I got in, because I think for a lot of young folks, they think that they have to have all this background, and that's actually not. In some cases, obviously it helps, but in other cases, it doesn't matter, right? And so, I mean, I started interviewing with them when I was 20, and I got in. I mean, I started 2 weeks after I graduated college. So,
So, friend for it's funny because like Andrew Bustamante, I interviewed him and he was, you know, he was like approached Well, I think he filled up. He had taken some kind of a test that wasn't specific to the CIA, but and then he was approached after taking the test. They came to him and said, "Look, you might want to talk to these guys over here." And and then Friendrock actually, I just like saying his last name, who's also former CIA. He actually had met someone at the CIA. He wanted to go CIA, and he actually asked him like, what do I need to make this happen? The guy kind of like, well, military would be good. And then if you got out, you got a degree in, I forget what it was, like accounting or a lawyer or something. So he aimed for it. How
So I
did you?
disagree with all of that, to be
Oh,
completely
okay.
honest with you. And I think it just fuels the gender narrative and why it's so lopsided in terms of males and females at these agencies. And I have to be honest, one of the things I hate the most is I always get, oh, well, you just had a desk job. Like, to be honest with you, I probably saw more action than most dudes did at the
Right.
CIA. And it is very frustrating to me when I hear people say, in no disrespect, that they were approached or they were in the military, and that it's insinuating that there's something special or different. We're all special. We're all different. And the way that mine was is I literally just walked up to a table at the career fair and gave them my resume and they called. And I think that that's a really important message for people to hear, because I think a lot of times people walk away from these interviews and conversations thinking that they're not good enough. And everyone's good enough. Look at how I got in. It is the most mundane way to get in. And I got in and got.
Why did you even approach him though?
That's what I was mentioning before about 1997. So I was working out actually in my sorority house, and I think it was, I did not have the channel on, another person did, and it was on CNN, and it was Peter Arnett and Peter Bergen. And I've since actually talked with Peter Bergen all about it. We've become friends. He was interviewing Osama bin Laden. It's the only interview that was ever done with Osama bin Laden in by a Western news station. And so you have to remember, growing up for me, my version of terrorism was like the Oklahoma City bombing, Waco. That was my barometer, I guess, of terrorism. And yeah, Al Qaeda existed. They were formed in '89, but they, to me, very much existed over there, which is like such a 19-year-old way of thinking, right? Like, if it doesn't impact me here, who cares, right? It's so egotistical. But it was in that interview where bin Laden issued a fatwa or declaration of war against the United States. And so that was in 1997. I was like, well, who is this person? Like, what is this? And that's what got me interested. And so I went to USC, great school, but in 1997, we didn't have like terrorism classes. And like, it just wasn't a thing, right? This is a pre 9/11 world. We have to remember that. And so I started taking I took Introduction to Islam, I took Modern Middle Eastern History, anything I could to still satisfy my history major, obviously. But again, I didn't know how to apply that. It wasn't clear that you go to the CIA and work counterterrorism. This was 1997. Like, it just wasn't clear. And so I went to a career fair in, it was either 98 or 99. I truly don't remember the year. And I asked, there was a recruiter there, and I went to him and I said, oh, you're like you do foreign stuff. Do you guys work this like counterterrorism thing? I was just curious, like legitimately curious. And this is so this was like the .com boom, if people remember that. And
Yeah.
everyone wanted to work in a .com. I did not want to work in a .com, but I went to the career fair just because it was on my way to astronomy class. And I gave him my resume and I said, like, look, do you do this counterterrorism thing? And he's like, well, really, our hiring focus is Russia and then Latin America. There was just a lot of instability, coup d'etats, drug stuff going on in Latin America. And he said, we're looking for Russian speakers and Spanish speakers. I was like, I don't speak a foreign language. At whatever, I don't really care about any of those issues, but like, here's my resume. That's truly all I thought about it. And that's why I feel like it's so important for me to be completely transparent about my story, because I think it makes more accessible to people to think that this is something they can do. And about 2 weeks later, they called, and the rest is history.
And they asked you to come in and be interviewed. I mean,
Yeah, it's obviously a process. You don't just get
like
hired
show out
right
I'm here.
away. And
Where's
I
my desk?
detail a lot of that process in my book, because it's a bit of a wild ride. But for me, I was so young, because this would have been February, Marchish of my junior year. So I would have been 20 at the time. And so, you go to like a cattle call interview, obviously locally, then they whittle that down, then they fly you out to do more invasive stuff, then they whittle that down, then they bring someone out to do a background check, then they whittle that down, and then you get your conditional offer employment. So by November of 99, which was my senior year, I had a conditional offer of employment. It was contingent upon me graduating college, obviously.
Where were you stationed?
When I was at the CIA,
Yeah.
I'm unfortunately not allowed to say because I was
Oh,
undercover. The only place I'm allowed to say is Afghanistan, but I can say the Middle East, Africa, and Europe.
okay. So you definitely, oh, well, you definitely left the US.
Yes, of course, you
Yeah.
have to. It's a foreign intelligence gathering
Fine.
organization.
I figure they got to have an office somewhere here, right? There's Langley, right? Like they're gathering. There's people that work desks somewhere, probably in the U.S.
Yes,
I'm assuming.
but that's not what
Um,
I did.
right. So, what can you say where you went, or not where
I
you
think
went, but
more rather
where,
than talking about specifically where I went, just my book was cleared by the CIA, but one of the things that they did want taken out, you'll see if you read it, there are redactions in it, is the locational information. And that's because when I was overseas, I was not in this name, and that can compromise um, sources, methods,
right,
assets, all of those kinds of things. So I think that was like their biggest issue in clearing my book through them. So I think it's better to maybe start with kind of like what I started doing and then like move into. So I
okay,
was shocked at CIA. You don't like tell them where you want to go. You don't
yeah,
like apply and say, "Look, I want to work in this division at this." Like it just doesn't work like that. It's the government, right? Like they put you wherever they want to put you. And so I was in the Directorate of Operations, which is the spy side, whatever. I knew I wouldn't be in the DI or an analyst because most of them have PhDs and language skills, which I don't have. I didn't work in science and technology. No one wants me doing math or science. So I was woefully unqualified for that. So I had a broad liberal arts degree. So that's where I went. And I went to the Counterterrorism Center. And everyone thought, oh, that's such a bummer. Don't you want to be in the Russia division? And for me, I was so excited because that's like exactly where I wanted to be. But again, this is a pre 9/11 world. And so my job at that time was to I'm trying to talk around it based on what's in my book. My job was to monitor terrorist training camps, who's going in, who's going out, what important people are there, is there an uptick in activity, is there a downtick in activity. Those kinds of things give us a lot of information in terms of like what we're going to do. And I was sitting at CIA headquarters, actually. Just because you're overseas doesn't mean you stay there all the time. Sometimes you're back at headquarters on September 11th in the Counterterrorism Center. And so that was quite obviously the experience, if you will.
so you're sitting at your desk
Mhm.
or at the coffee maker, getting
There's a
some
Starbucks
coffee.
there.
The start, oh, okay, and somebody says, "Holy shit!" and you look up at the TV, and
So I did not know. So at CIA, you can't bring a cell phone in. You don't have access to an outside like line. And so if no one has the TV on, which is so weird, you're not necessarily getting like live stuff, right? If no one bothered to turn it on yet, which I didn't care. And I was sitting at my desk and my outside line rang and it was someone in an outbuilding saying, turn on the TV.
right,
And the interesting thing was I turned it on to see the second plane hit. And what was interesting is that terrorism is not initially what went through my head. I'm sorry, I turned it on to see the second plane hit. I don't know if you remember this, but in August of that year, August of 2000, it was either maybe a Mets player, I can't remember, was flying his private plane and he flew it into an apartment building in New York City
mhm,
completely by accident, killed everyone on board. It was a very small plane. That's what went through my mind because it had literally happened 3 weeks before. I just had remembered seeing it all in the news. But then when the plane obviously hit the Pentagon, we all knew um, that it was what it was.
right. Um, yeah, it's funny because when I actually heard it on the way to work, drove to like was it Circuit City? I don't even have
It's
Circuit
probably
City.
still around then. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah,
it's not now, but yeah.
yeah. Ran in, grabbed a TV, or I was getting a TV because I was going to bring it back to the office, and I was standing in front of a big screen TV when the second plane hit. And I remember the first one thinking, "Wow, like how is that even possible?" But went to go grab a TV for the office because somebody had called and said, "Can you pick up a TV? Like this is wild." And when the second one hit, I remember thinking, "Oh, that can't be an accident. Like
No,
something's
of course
wrong.
not. Yeah.
That's not possible." Like but the first one I did kind of think, yeah, that I don't know what happened, but
An accident, right? Like,
yeah,
it
like yeah,
happens. Yeah.
like that's not possible. Like, the idea that the whole that whole idea of a suicide bomber or suicide, using yourself. I listen. That's so foreign to me as a
Of course.
narcissistic person. Like I'm not taking myself out. There's so many other people that are going before me.
I
I'm like,
think that it's beyond just narcissism. I also think it's just a
right.
normal thing to, like, self-preservation is a
I
normal
I hear you, but
part
I
of
feel
personality.
for me, I feel I'm on it's a different levels. Like what? How is it possible? So how can deprive the world of me? Anyway, so
That's awesome.
So yeah, but I remember grabbing the TV and went back and we watched it. We were just like, "Oh my god!" Like the internet had gone down
Yeah,
in
of
my
course.
office, like everything. And then they landed the planes. My parents were stuck in like Europe. They were in Europe. They were stuck there for like a week. Um, so what were the marching orders after that?
Yeah, it's really hard because obviously now I have time to process it, but Congress came down really hard on us, right? Like, we were blamed for September 11th. And that's a really big load to, like, carry, right? Like, for the rest of your life. And I think, but at the time, no one cared how you felt, like, about it, which is fine because, like, we needed to, like, get to work. But I think it all impacted us, obviously, at that time. So for me, my marching orders are really different than everyone else's. About a week and a half before September 11th, and I have to talk around this. It's in my book, but they won't clear the whole thing, so it's fine. That I was briefed into a more classified program. It was myself and two other gentlemen. I guess we were doing a good job, whatever. I don't know. And they briefed us into this program, and they said it was the very first iteration of the program ever. We were the first ones to do it. And I remember asking the director Tenet at the time, will we have to actually use this and, like, kill people? And he's like, not unless there's a big terrorist attack. So I think for me, my brain went, oh shit, like, uh, right? Like, I don't know how I, like, feel about this, but I immediately started working that program. It wasn't supposed to have been used until, like, the spring of 2002, but obviously they moved it up because of what had happened. Um, and so we were in a very small, small room, kind of packed together. It was myself, the two other gentlemen. Bush was in there every day. Condoleezza Rice was in there every day. Tenet was in there every day. We spent Christmas in there, Thanksgiving in there. I mean, 24/7. Working this program. And it was, in a weird way, gratifying because we killed a lot of people. But at the same time, it was weird because, like, we're killing people. And I don't know that I had, like, processed all of that yet. We had a lot of successes, but then we had a lot of failures. And so I was on duty. It was December of 2001. And we knew where bin Laden was. He was in a place called Tora Bora. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
heard of that before. We had him. We knew where he was. We were ready to go. We were ready to kill him. But the problem is if you bomb something, guess what people do? If they survive, they run away, right? Like, that's just, again, self-preservation, human nature, narcissism, whatever you want to call it, but they run away. And so we had requested that ground troops come in and pick up anyone that ran away. And the president said no, but told us to continue doing what we were doing. And bin Laden escaped that night and
Right.
on
Because
our
of the
watch. What?
Then you missed them by like a day or so, or a week or
No, no.
something?
He was there.
Right.
He was in the fighting situation that we were in. We had
Oh,
him.
he just got
Like,
away.
he got away because ground troops weren't sent in and he ran away,
Okay.
which is frustrating to us.
Well, it's a difficult situation. It's hard to make moves from, whatever 10,000 miles away. Uh, so I don't know. It always makes me think of. Did you ever read Tom Clancy?
Not
Are
really.
you serious?
I'm
Tom
sorry.
Clancy's great.
I was like a
Anyway,
Nancy Drew kind of girl.
oh my gosh. Well, Tom Clancy, there's one of the things they're looking at satellite images. Like they're trying to track down a group of I want to say they're IRA terrorists or something, but trying to track them down and they just can't figure out where they are. They're watching all of these camps in Africa and there's one photo of someone laying out like in the sun.
Oh, yeah, I've
This is
seen that.
not yeah,
I
this
mean,
is
I've
not
seen
normal.
satellite images of we weren't doing satellite images, just to, like, clarify,
Right.
that's not what we were doing, but I have seen satellite images of us, like, checking on Russians and their, weapons, and then they, am I allowed to curse on here?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they stamp out "fuck you" in the snow so that when the satellite comes over, you see it. It's
Yeah.
really great. I mean, it's fine. I don't really care, like, but we weren't doing satellite stuff.
Well, no, I was going to say in this one that the reason the way they tracked them down was that there was the group happened to have one woman in it. And they were like, the men wouldn't be laying out, and the woman was laying out. And when they zeroed in, even though it was super grainy, there were boobs. And they were like, that's a woman laying in the sun. That this is our people. This is where they are. And they send in some people to take out the entire camp, and they miss them by like a day or something like that. So, but it's funny the Tom Clancy thing. He had a book called The Sum of All Fears, which was written 10 or 15 years prior to 9/11. And there's a Japanese terrorist that crashes his plane, and I mean like a 777, like a 777, a Boeing 777, into Congress when it is a joint session of Congress
Hmm,
and takes it out. So it's funny, like 10, 15 years later, the
that
similarity.
comes
Anyway,
to fruition.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what other things were you?
Yeah, so after that, I didn't, like, go off that program because I lost bin Laden. It was just that I had done, like, 100 missions already by that point, and they're like, "Alright, this is not a sustainable." I mean, we were literally working 21 hours a day. Like, you can't sustain that over a period of time. And so I was sent to a brand new division that had started in the Counterterrorism Center called CTC WMD. The government loves their, like,
Yeah, yeah,
acronyms or alphabet soup crap. And so I went to CTC WMD, which is a brand new division, and I specialized in crude toxins and poisons. And so my target that I was supposed to find was a guy named Zarqawi, and I don't know if you've heard his name, but
yeah. I've
he's
heard
the
the name.
founder of ISIS. He's dead now, but at the time he worked for Bin Laden. And Bin Laden was real good at like franchising stuff. And he said, "Yo, Zarqawi, you're my poison dude. Like, that's what I want you to do, explosive poisons, toxins, all of it." And so they sent me to poison school, and I learned how to make all of it. It's really easy, shockingly. And then that took me overseas quite a bit, obviously, to meet with assets, find him, get information from other intelligence services, talk to some terrorists, those kinds of things. But that was what I worked, was crude toxins and poisons in the Counterterrorism Center.
How long were you there?
About 5-ish years. Yeah.
Does that require undercover missions or just
You're
it?
always undercover if you're in the DO for the most part.
Okay. I mean, when I think of undercover, I think that you're pretending to be someone you're not,
It's
living
not
as
how
someone.
it works.
I know.
So,
Well,
I think that's part of the problem
I
and why
haven't
it's
I haven't read the
forgotten.
book. I haven't read the book. And it sounds to me like if I did read it, every other page has a bunch of black lines across. You probably should have done that. Did you rewrite those sections or just leave the black?
So my book was quite the process. I actually went ahead. I got smart though about writing my book. At that time, they were denying publications in full to like lots of people, and I was like, "Oh shit, I don't want that to be me." So what I did was I actually read every CIA book that was out there that I knew had been cleared by like big guys, like heads of the CTC, Jose Rodriguez, Hank Crumpton, Tenet, like all of them. And then I footnoted every single thing that had been cleared in their book
Right.
and not my right. So it helped. But the problem was they were not undercover and I was. And so that's where we ran into problems was like locational stuff. So I rewrote it. What you see now in my book is a rewrite of like 5 times just to get it
Mm.
that way. When I first got it back, 8 chapters were completely blacked out, like fully blacked out. And you cannot publish a book like that, obviously. And so by the time we got it to what it looks like now, there are still blackout spots, but it's obviously very intelligible. So yeah, it's real
Um,
frustrating.
yeah, I definitely would have left some of the blackouts in there just to,
It's in there. There's
intrigue.
some people who hate it. There's some people who love it. I don't really care. It is what
Yeah.
it is. But yes, some of them are in there because then I just reached a point where I'm like, I'm definitely done doing all this. Y'all can read it now. So like this is what we're doing. But yeah, it's very, very frustrating.
So you were explaining the difference between what people think undercover work is.
Yes. So I think people watch a lot of TV, right? And I think that's wonderful. But it always ends up in like I get very frustrated, especially me, because I get so many people who are like, "Well, you couldn't have worked for the CIA. Look at what you look like." Like that's really upsetting, and I think a lot of men don't always get that, if that makes sense. And that's very frustrating. Part of it is this whole undercover stuff. It's not about always changing what you look like, it's just about changing where you work, right? Like those are two different things. And it's not to say that some of it doesn't involve, I can't talk about it too much, but it's not to say that some of it doesn't involve a little bit of disguise here and there. But it's not what you think.
Right. Yeah. I was gonna say, Frick Frock. Frick Frock was saying that like he's like I had a regular job. Of course, he had a he had a regular job. He said, or it appears that you work at a regular job.
I
You
have
know,
to be
so,
honest with you. I'm not obviously like throwing any shade at him, but it's very unusual that you would be able to talk about that. I just try to be as respectful as possible
right,
to the CIA and what I know I'm allowed to talk about and what I'm not allowed to talk about. Um, Obviously, I'm not doubting what he did, but I'm very surprised that he's able to and willing to talk about that. Let's put it that way.
okay. So so you were in that program, the poison program for 5 years,
Yeah,
and then where did you go from there?
at the FBI. I became a special agent at the FBI.
Okay, how long? So how long were you with the CIA?
Hold on. 5.5-ish years, 6 years.
Okay.
Not super long.
And then so why the cross? How did the crossover happen?
Oh, I was sick of being overseas. I was very burned out. You have to remember being in the counterterrorism center before, during, and after September 11th um, is rough, obviously. And so I made the decision. I love the CIA. I have a ton of awards in my office. This is my husband's office, but I am still friends with people there. Still friends with my old bosses, but honestly, I didn't want a life overseas anymore. I was real tired. And I decided, well, let's work counterterrorism, but then do that at the FBI. And honestly, I think we were at that point, in the throes of the Iraq War. Our office had something that was misused by Colin Powell, which I talk about in my book. Everyone says that's the best part of my book. I don't know because it's the least sexy of my book, but I don't know. But yeah,
Well, that's what the weapons of mass destruction. The
no, so we were working the poisons and toxins on the terrorist side, obviously. And we had, contrary to what people say about stuff, um, you work sometimes at headquarters in between being overseas. And so a lot of times we called ourselves the poison trio because it was the three of us. We made a chart. It's like the most unsexy thing in the world. And we had Zarqawi at the top because he's the head. And then we had some of his henchmen that we were also looking for with their phone numbers, geo coordinates, like all of it. It was just easy for us. And it just said Zarqawi Poison Network. It's really like boring title. And a member of the presidential administration came in to our vault where we worked, saw the chart and said he wanted the chart. Obviously you give them the chart. Like
yeah.
our director gave him the chart. And that chart the next day was used by Colin Powell on the floor of the UN to make the case to go to war in Iraq. And the chart
Okay.
was changed. The title was changed. And it said the Zarqawi's terrorist ties to Iraq. We all knew that that was incorrect.
Right.
And then what happened was is all those other targets that we had on there, we had been following them, but they went underground because now they knew that we were following them. And then they blew up trains in Spain and we couldn't catch them and we couldn't stop it because of all of that damage. Colin Powell has since admitted in his book that he wrote before he passed away that it was doctored and it was misused. But yeah, our chart started the Iraq War.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I was going to say, well, maybe helped, but I mean, I don't think anything was going to stop it. You know what I'm saying?
I
Like
don't
it was,
think anything was going to stop it, but I think that chart, because they brought in the word terrorism,
mhm.
pretty much the general consensus is that chart was the impetus for getting the votes that were needed,
Mm,
um, which is very frustrating.
yeah. So when you crossed over to the FBI, like how did that go? You said you were tired of it. Like what is the process of saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to go to the FBI
I had begun the process. I was like super transparent, with everyone there. I just had a really good relationship. I didn't leave because I hated it. I just left because their mission is overseas intelligence collection. Like that is what they do. That's not what I wanted to do anymore. So like it's probably time to leave. And so it was like a mature reason, right, to leave.
right?
And so I left on a Friday. I started at Quantico on a Monday. Yeah,
What so in a
it was
completely different.
horrible. I hated every single minute of it.
No, you didn't. Did
I
you?
heard yeah, it was the worst experience of my life working at the FBI. It's an
Really?
awful organization. Yes.
So what did you
Can I
do?
talk about it? I'm very
What did you do
transparent.
there?
Well, Quantico was awful. The part of the problem is the CIA and the FBI hated each other, and I don't think I realized that. We had FBI agents who were detailed to us in the Counterterrorism Center, and they were wonderful. I had such a great relationship with them. So I just assumed everyone there would be the same. So I think I had that strike against me. So when everyone goes around and introduces themselves, they're saying I was this, whatever their jobs were, which is great. I said, I came from CIA. And the director of the FBI of Quantico at that time called me into his office and then very publicly said that I was lying about where I worked, even though the FBI had to come to CIA headquarters to conduct my background investigation. Clearly, I wasn't lying. Like they had all. He just hated the CIA, and as a result, hated me. And so every single thing at Quantico was a problem. Like one of the first modules that you do is interview techniques. It's like the most mundane. So that's like the first thing you do. And you have to wear a suit instead of your uniform. Fine, whatever. Go in, do my interview. Same suit I wore to like brief the Saudis, like back in and CIA never had an issue. I get called in. You need to apologize to your instructor because your suit makes him uncomfortable. So I made the decision, right or wrong, to apologize. And then I went and bought like size suits that were like 4 sizes too big. And then they would make me the point person on like every difficult thing in Hogan's Alley, which is part of your training. They just wanted me to fail, like in every way, shape, or form. And I did it. And I think it really pissed them off.
Right.
We had 2 gentlemen in my class that accidentally shot themselves during firearms training. They were lauded. Everyone loved them. I just kept, to me, if you shoot yourself during firearms training, that is an automatic, you're fired. You
Right.
cannot be an FBI agent because you cannot safely handle a weapon, like period, full stop, the end. Nope. Um, it was so messed up on so many different levels. It was awful. Um, and my mom always asked, like, why didn't you quit? But I think I thought it would end, right? Like, Quantico is this finite, at that time it was 17 weeks. So it's this finite period of time, right? You graduate and then you move along and it will stop. But the head of my Quantico at the time was also mad that I didn't get put in a big field office. I was put in a resident agent. Like every petty thing that you can imagine, I dealt with.
So, well, I mean, and that never stopped.
Never stopped the entire time I was there. Because then what had happened was that it is the most gossipy, dysfunctional organization, and I'm very open about it. And they have a massive sexual harassment problem that for some reason hasn't been addressed. Why I have no idea. But the problem was the head of Quantico at the time then felt it necessary to call everyone in my office that I was incoming to and tell him how much he didn't like me.
Okay.
It's the most high school thing I've ever seen in my life.
Okay. So
I
when
stayed.
you, I was, when you, well, I mean, eventually you would have been transferred out of that. You were transferred out of that office, right? Out of Quantico. So,
Well, you graduate. Everyone
right.
graduates.
So you're not really around him anymore. Are you still
Yeah,
under
but it followed me to my new office that I was sent to because he felt it necessary
to
to.
pass that along? Hey, by the
Yes.
way, there's an issue. I have an issue with this
I just
woman.
don't like her. Even though I literally passed everything, there's nothing they could do to make me not graduate. So I did.
Right.
Honestly, if I was that bad, then they would have kicked me out of Quantico like a long time. They just felt it necessary to make my life difficult.
Oh, so when you were moved, you weren't moved to your. It wasn't a field off. It was, what did you call it?
So it's a field, so all field offices, like especially LA. So I was out of the LA field office, but when you have a real big field office like that, New York, LA, San Francisco, Dallas, you are put in what's called resident agencies or smaller
Right.
ones. And so I was in the Santa Ana resident agency,
Okay.
and the
Um.
case I worked was super cool, but
So what was the
the
case?
environment sucked.
What did you end up working?
So weirdly, they didn't put me working counterterrorism. Don't.
For whatever
Truly,
reason.
I think what happened was at the time, FBI agents did not have to take a lifestyle polygraph to be FBI agents. CIA officers have to take a lifestyle polygraph.
What does that
Um,
mean? Lifestyle polygraph. I don't understand.
yeah, so that sucks. It is, and I do detail that in my book because it was a wild ride for me. It's like 8 hours long, and they go into every part of your lifestyle. And all it is, the bottom line is not to determine whether you're lying, it's to determine whether or not you're susceptible to blackmail and being recruited by a foreign entity.
Okay.
That's all it is. But you have to have that to get what's called a SCI or sensitive compartmented information clearance. Um, a lot of people have top secret clearances, but it's the SCI that's more difficult. And so everyone at CIA does the lifestyle poly, but not everyone at FBI at that time did.
Okay.
I already had done it. Obviously, I came from CIA. Another reason, like, why would you not believe me? I literally brought my clearance over here with me. Like, it's fine. Anywho, I think because I had that SCI and it was the only Chinese counterintelligence case in the Bureau at the time, and it was dealing with the CIA, the Navy, it was a very sensitive case, a very small group of people. They wanted my clearance there. They didn't want to have to clear someone else. And so they put me there because of my clearance. That's what I think. No one ever
Okay.
told me that, but that's what I think.
So that's the case you worked a what,
Yeah.
not
So
Chinese espionage or
it was
Chinese.
the very first Chinese economic espionage case here in the US. It was covered in the New Yorker, and like it's actually a really interesting case. Do you want me to tell you about it or not
Yeah,
really?
of course I want to hear about.
Okay.
Well, first of
Yeah.
all, well, one, could clarify what, the economic
Yeah.
espionage means, and two, I want to hear about it because I'm actually working on a story which I've been working on for like 2 years, so it's going slow. Um, but but I'm fascinated. It's because it takes place in the early '90s, where it was a group of Chinese triad members that
Oh yeah, they're
started.
so violent.
Yeah,
They're one
well,
of the most violent gangs.
and this is the thing. It was so. This is when China was starting to manufacture computers, and so
Oh.
they came over here and they went to the triad. Actually, they were in Hong Kong. It's whatever. It's too complicated, but they were in Hong Kong and they connected with the triad. And they sent, businessmen, Chinese businessmen, which, might as well be the government. So sent them over and said,
Agreed.
we need these types of computer chips. And they manufacture them in the United States. And here's the places they manufacture them. And so the triad members would go in. You might remember this. Well, obviously you weren't working at the time, but it was huge that they would go in. They would watch a manufacturing plant, go in the middle of the night, zip tie everybody, load up a van with 10,000, processing chips, and then almost drive to like a parking lot and swap out the van for a duffel bag full of $5 million, 2 million. So they're giving $10 million for three. They're getting 30 cents on the dollar,
Right.
and so they're taking these chips and they're shipping them back to China to be put into computers that are then reshipped to the U.S. to be sold to consumers, in the United States. So they're shipping them to China to be for the manufacturers to put them in computers and ship them here to be sold to the citizens. And this went on. This went on. There was like 30 of these things. It was huge. It was a massive rash. It was so bad that Bill Clinton did a presidential order to say that in all computer manufacturers in the United States had to have armed guards on staff.
Wow.
So then they start hitting the trucks leaving. Leaving, they would pull them over and rob them that way. So eventually there was a murder, and the FBI came in, and I forget the name of it. It had some called like West Chip or something. I forget what it was called, but had some cutesy name. And they came in and they busted a ton of the groups, but there were two separate groups. So they're rah rah rah. We just took them down, and 2 weeks later, bam, another one gets hit because they did. They took down one group, and then but they missed the other one. So a few months later, they got that group, and they eventually just dismantled the entire operation. But it's such an amazing story that these guys were so brazen. Like when you
Yeah.
hear what they
But
did,
that's pretty typical for Triad. They're very
right?
brazen and they're very violent. So, I mean, I don't want to say I'm shocked. That's I don't want to minimize, obviously, but like that is how they operate. It's a very Triad. Let's put it
Yeah,
that.
I'm so anyway, that's a story I'm writing that I'm fascinated with. The problem is I contacted the guy in prison. We spoke a few times, and he didn't want to be involved. He
That's
did,
fair.
but then he didn't because he's very ingrained. He's got like 350 years and like in multiple jurisdictions. He's never getting out, and
Right.
he's very I'm not snitching on my
Right.
friends.
Well, because there's an
These
idea of
people,
self-preservation in prison, right? Like I
right,
can't I
right,
can't be mad at him for that. He doesn't want to be
right.
bullied in prison.
Well, but then he's also telling me like I can't. He was telling me he's going to file a lawsuit. I can't do this. He's already copywrote his story. I'm like, well, okay, you didn't sue
You
the New
don't
York
own your stuff.
Times. You
Yeah,
didn't
no.
sue, and not just that. I'm like, I'm reading the transcripts. Like, I don't need your help to
No,
write
you
this
don't.
story.
Of
I
course
would
not.
like it. I would like to know about his daughter. I would like to know about his relationship with the mother of his kids, his parents, and there's some stuff you could just garner from the
Humanize him.
Yes, I would like to, but after speaking with him, he was such a jerk off about it.
But you know
Um,
what? Here's the thing too, is like I would imagine as part of his sentencing, although obviously I could be wrong, but I would imagine as part of his sentencing, he's not allowed to profit on it about it, and he's probably not allowed to write books on it, right? Like especially books from prison.
well, he wouldn't be
So
writing the book. I would be writing the book about him.
that's
I
what I'm
just wanted
saying.
to
And so
interview
I don't
him.
know what he's copywriting. Like there's nothing he can do
No,
with it,
I
if
know.
that makes sense.
Listen, it's inmates. So they get something in their head sometimes. They think this is the way
Oh,
it
of course.
works, and
Yes.
it's like, listen, that's not how it works. It's like these people that are in a public park and you take a photo and they're like, "Oh, you got to erase that. You've got me in the photo." It's like you're in a
No, I
public park,
don't. It's a
bro.
public park,
Yeah,
dude.
right,
Sorry. Don't come here if you don't want. I
right.
agree with you.
So yeah, I'm super interested in the
Oh,
the whole Chinese thing.
yeah, so my what we did is a little different in that it was less brazen, to be totally honest with you, but all actually a little more disturbing when you think about all the effort that went into it. And so this case is out there. He's been tried. He's been convicted. It's been written about. So I am not divulging anything
Right.
in any way, shape, or form. And so this dude, this family, the Mac family, namely Ty and Chi Mac, they're brothers, and one of the brothers was working at a company in Southern California called Power Paragon. And the Navy noticed that two technologies that they had were like missing all of the sudden, and that the Chinese like developed it overnight when it was something that we had spent like decades doing, right? So they tipped off the CIA. And the CIA then found out that those two technologies came from a company in Southern California. So then the CIA had to tip off the FBI because the company is in
Yeah.
California. And so the two technologies, which seem like really irrelevant, but are actually kind of a big deal. The first one's called QED, or Quiet Electric Drive. It makes submarine propellers silent. That's actually a
It
big
seems like a
deal.
big deal.
Like you want the element of surprise, right? In
Yeah.
war. And then the other one was sort of a radar confusing paint. So they would paint the underside of our warships and then our submarines with this paint, so it would confuse radar, right? So that they couldn't see. That's actually a big deal too, right?
Right.
Like you want that. Well, the Chinese like developed it overnight, and so basically the Department of Navy, the CIA, and the FBI are like, okay, we have like a problem. Someone's stealing this shit and like giving it to China, right? So we got to figure out who works this account. Just a few people. And then they figured out that there was a guy who had been here 28 years, became a naturalized citizen. China planted him here for 28 years
Whoa.
in this company to steal this stuff. Like that is very well thought out. So much so that he and Rebecca, his wife, became naturalized citizens. Like that's how long they were here. That's crazy. And so he was very much an agent of China. He was a huge Maoist, like big time Maoist, and was like super cheap. We thought, I don't know if this is like too much detail,
No, I
right or
love it.
not, but
Yeah, I'm already got questions.
we were tailing him, and we thought it was so weird. We were in like a Lowe's or a Home Depot, like one of those stores. I just don't remember which one. And we're like, oh, he's going to go meet his handler here. We're going to watch him. No, he went there at a certain time every day to get free coffee because he was so cheap. And so he made millions of dollars a year, but this is how he chose to live because he gave all of his money back to the government because he was such a Maoist and such a communist. Like that's ideologically what he believed. Fine. And so we thought we were like going to get all this cool stuff, right? Like from following him. We followed him to a car wash. He would just to the gas station. He would go there to like clean his car for free. Like, I mean, it was just so weird. And then one day we concocted a plan. We made him believe that he won a sweepstakes to go on a cruise to Alaska, knowing how cheap he was. Like, so this whole thing takes time. Like, you have to get inside people's heads, right? And think about like what makes them tick. I
Right.
think a lot of times, even at CIA, when you're recruiting an asset, it's not about finding things to blackmail them. It's about finding actually commonalities and what makes them tick, right? To like get that relationship. I think we see in TV that it's about blackmail. It's actually not. But with him, we realized, okay, you're totally cheap. You will absolutely take a free cruise to Alaska. And he did. And so we sent, they didn't even work this case, but we sent a husband and wife agent team on the cruise with them to follow them, which is like a sweet gig, right? And then the rest of us, we obtained, which is very rare, a surreptitious entry warrant. Those are very rare to get. And
Right.
we broke into his house without him being there and installed every camera, listening device under the sun that you can possibly imagine. So we broke in at like 2:30 in the morning. But even that takes time too. So that was fun. We got nothing off of those devices ever, like at all. And so you would think we would, right? But you want to know how he was caught? Was from his trash. So we always dumpster dive on people that were have open cases on. That's like not unusual. I think everyone knows that.
Yeah.
But we don't like just pull up to your house, take your trash and like move along, right? Like you don't do that. So they would pick up within a 5-mile radius, the waste management facility. And so you would have to go back to the waste management facility to go through the trucks.
Oh, that's horrible.
Well, but
So
guess
you have to kind of they kind of tell you like that neighborhood was dumped in this area, and then you guys have to sift through all that kind of. Oh
yes.
man,
And I had to go into the trucks because just did. And so
that's all glamour. That's
it
all glamour.
really is. But it was interesting. One of the things that was so great, though, was very easy to find their trash. I got used to it after a period of time. They were so cheap, they didn't buy plates. So they would eat on newspapers and then fold up the newspapers into like these origami. So I would just look for the bags that had that in it. It was so easy. But one of the ones we noticed had like ripped pieces of paper in Chinese. And so we always would bring those back. We don't speak Chinese, but there was an analyst who spoke Chinese. And so they put them on the table and then put them back together. And it was his actual handling documents from the Chinese government telling him what to steal. So easy. That's like an open shut case, right? Like at that point. And so he was arrested at LAX and then sentenced to Lone Poke. He died in Lone Poke. He was 72 when he was arrested. So I mean he died in prison. His wife served 3 years and then she was deported back to China, where I'm sure she's like a hero there. But yay.
So one for them to send him here. I mean, keep in mind they don't know like at that time, they don't know the technology. They're just thinking to themselves, get in a position where you can acquire
The
technology
thought
that can be
behind that is
right.
insane.
And then the other thing is, I would think being surrounded or being, what I'm trying to think of, whatever, engrossed in the U.S. culture for that long, you would start to look around and say, listen,
Nope, not him. They
this is
never
all
assimilated. They
real.
barely learned English. And I'm
Uh,
not saying you have to assimilate, but to be here 28 years and not have any of the culture rub off on you is unusual.
yeah. I wonder if that's part of their practice that they, well, listen, the Chinese are so brazen too. Like they're practically setting up like, little offices here to harass,
Yes.
Chinese.
Those police stations, I think
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah, they're little police stations. Sometimes
Yeah.
they'll even grab somebody or try and force them on a plane or
Yes.
ridiculous. Like that to me is extremely brazen. Um,
It was brazen, and I mean, I'm glad he's went to jail and died there, but how many other people have been here for 28 years, right? Like,
oh yeah, yeah.
it's it's very interesting, and he was the equivalent, because I know we were talking about Undercover before. He was the equivalent at CIA of what we would call a knock, right? Like, there's all different kinds of cover, and so knock cover is very rare because it's very expensive. But that's what Valerie Plame had. I don't know if you know her.
That doesn't even
She was
sound
the one that was outed by the Bush administration. The CIA officer had to be called back.
oh yeah.
So she worked in my office, and so she had to be called back. But knock as non-official cover is being like working in a private business. Official cover is, any official government entity.
Um, oh, I was thinking the TV show, you probably never watched this, but it was pretty good. It's called The Americans.
So I
And
actually know Joe who wrote it.
oh, really? What a
Yeah, so
great show.
I moderated his book discussion for him.
Really?
Yeah, he's I really like him. Russia's really like his passion. We I don't know that he and I had actual. So when he would have been at the agency, he was working Russia, I was working counterterrorism, so we wouldn't have had any like crossover. And I
Right.
think he left after like 2 or 3 years, so I didn't have a lot of crossover with him. But I've since become like friendly with him since then, and he's really cool.
What a great show. It only lasted a few seasons,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
That's too bad. That was such a great show. Um,
He just wrote another book, though. It's good.
what's the other book about?
I don't remember. Sorry.
Sounds like it must have been really good. Um, so, uh, okay. So I have a question. Look, just because the what was the Chinese guy's name?
Ty Mac and Chi Mac were both of them two guys,
Oh, okay. Okay.
brothers.
So
They're brothers.
so when they came here, right? And you obviously you backtrack who had access to this information. And of course he's suspicious. He's a Chinese naturalized citizen, right? So you become suspicious. How are you sure? Like any number of people probably could have had access to that information. Like, how are you positive, or did you look at multiple people
We
and just
did. We
zero in
looked at
on?
multiple people, but there were only two people working those accounts.
Oh, okay. So it's pretty. Okay.
And so it became very clear that he sort of had this motivation, because you've got to surveil him. Like, all this stuff takes time. This takes years, right? Like, this isn't just like we woke up one day and decided
Do
that
you,
they were going to be our people. This takes time.
yeah, I was
um
just gonna say, do you have any idea? But obviously you do. I was gonna say the discipline it would take to be in that environment and have such strong whatever that his values were so strong and so different than everybody around him to never say anything. Like, I can barely, you have no idea how many times someone will say something on a podcast, and the most I'll let slip, and every once in a while I'll let it slip, and I'll say, I don't necessarily agree with that, but anyway, and I just keep going, just because it's almost like I can't let that go. Like, I can't let you say that and say nothing. And so to be surrounded by a bunch of Americans that long and
Mhm.
not let them know how you feel about their values, the discipline
Well,
involved in that.
it was really interesting because one of them never had children, but the other one had a wife and children. And what was fascinating, because when you hear 28 years, like you're gonna have a family. But the fascinating thing was one of them had a 19-year-old son who was a student at UCLA and was in every sense a capitalist American. And you
Wow.
would hear them fighting about him because they couldn't understand like why he's so into stuff and things and money and all of the like, and it was just like an interesting like family dynamic because I think the generation below them clearly wanted nothing to do with this like Maoist whatever lifestyle. They didn't grow up in China, they grew up here. And so it was just the kind of like
Hmm.
fighting, I guess.
Well, there's tons of, I don't know if tons is the right word, but there's a considerable amount of Chinese that like they'll find coming across the border that
Oh, you mean like on the southern border? Yeah, I've
yeah.
seen that.
And it's I'm always wondering, one, how do you even get out of China? Like two, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then you make it across the border to the United States.
I
So
mean, China allows freedom of movement and freedom of travel, right? It's not North Korea, which like
right.
North Korea you don't get out of. So, but I think too the ones coming over the border, I mean, that was new for me even, right? Like that's not what I expected either. Um, but I do usually I have an idea of what people's motivations are for like coming across the southern border, whatever their nationality. I can usually figure that out. With this one, I'm definitely on the fence. I can't decide if they're coming here as like government plants because I don't think they are. Because if you're coming here from the border undocumented, you're not going to get a job, right? Like within these companies. And so that's what I can't quite figure out. I'm on the fence still.
I think I think
Definitely on
like
the fence.
to me, if you're leaving China and they're saying, look, we don't want you arriving in the US as a Chinese citizen, um, and being documented as coming into the United States, we would prefer you to appear to be going on vacation to Mexico and then sneak in, get rid of all
Without
your documents, and then use some kind of identity theft to start a new life. I mean, and that's something that, I don't know how much you know about, my charges, but
yes.
listen, I've had two
I Googled
dozen.
you.
I've had 2 dozen passports, US passports issued by the State Department. I've had 27 driver's licenses issued by the DMV. And these are people that and, pulled over, given tickets, gone to traffic school, questioned, brought downtown, and never was my identity in question because I had legitimate
Legitimate
documents.
documents.
Right. Now
They're not hard to
then
come by.
right. Well, they're not hard to acquire if you steal someone's identity that is not using their identity actively, then it's
Right.
not hard to
Get it.
go into the DMV and say, "Hey, this is who I am. Here's all my paperwork. Here's this. Take a picture. Get your driver's license." And listen, a week later, I'd go and fill out my passport application with my pictures, with their birth certificate
Right. I was
picture,
going
the
to say
whole
not
thing.
their birth
You know,
certificate. Yeah.
and then 2 weeks later, and this was keep in mind this was 10 years ago. 2 weeks later, but it's still post 9/11. Like nothing's
Mhm.
changed other than the fact you could pay back then and get it expedited. And in 2 weeks, I'd have a passport. Now you can pay the fee to be expedited. Still takes 2 months. Like it's
What about biometrics though? Because I wonder how much that will change the shape of this.
I that yeah, you're right. But even now, even to this day, they don't ask for fingerprints. They're
Mhm.
not for your passport. They're not asking for anything like that. So, um, and honestly, those photos of you, they're not close enough to take retinal scans or do anything.
Oh
Like
no, I
maybe
agree.
facial recognition, maybe, but
I just wonder if it'll at some point get to a point where every
it has
ID
to,
is
right?
biometric based. Like I know we're not there yet, but then I just wonder then how that will go in terms of getting fraudulent
But the
stuff.
technology is changing so fast, right?
Yeah.
Like you hate to
Yeah.
be that first guy, you know? You've already done this 4 times. You're sitting in there like, "Mr. Cox, could you come over
Yes.
here?" "Mr. Cox? My name's Brad." Like, stop it.
Sure. I do wonder though how that will start to like because I think the technology is getting there, right?
Yeah,
Like I just feel like it is. And so I wonder how much because I arrested plenty of white collar folks, at the FBI who had plenty of fake documents, at any given time. So all of that's not surprising. With the Mac brothers, they came here in their real name, right?
right.
And so but I think they had no nefarious anything linked to them. They just looked like Chinese immigrants, right, who were coming to the US. So I don't know. It's interesting. The white collar folks always had a lot of documents.
Yeah. If
They
you're
used
going,
their favorite thing to do is to put the white collar crime guys, the older ones, in my car to drive back once they had been arrested because none of them thought I was worth anything whatsoever. They'd all been Mirandized,
they start
but they
chatting you up, think they're chatting you
yes,
up, and
because they thought that I was just some dumb 21 whatever year old person, and they would just talk, 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 talk.
yeah,
It
it's a
was great.
problem. It's a problem.
I enjoyed it, but I'm sure.
Arrogance works against you a lot of times.
Yes, but it works for me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm not looking at it from your point of view.
But see, being unexpected, both at CIA and FBI, helped me sometimes be successful with terrorists, with criminals, whatever.
Right. Um,
Ego's my best friend because I don't
yeah.
have one, but like criminals do.
I was thinking when we were talking about motivation, I was thinking like motivation, like, and you were talking about uh, blackmail. Like, yeah, I don't think blackmail really works well at all.
I
Like
don't.
it's like ideology, economics. I forget what the other one is.
Well, the interesting thing
Revenge.
was when I would be at dark sites, black sites that we call them at CIA, and talking to terrorists. I thought, I guess ego did get in my way. I thought I knew why terrorists became terrorists. Like I thought all of them were fanatics, all of them hated me. Like I just thought all the things. And boy, was I wrong. One of them, big terrorist, was like, hey, like I didn't become a terrorist because I hate America and I'm like a radical. I became a terrorist because I'm from a country that has no government, doesn't provide for the needs of its people. He was abandoned when he was 7, living in a sewer ditch, couldn't read, couldn't write, had unchecked hepatitis. Someone from al-Qaeda found him in that sewer ditch, brought him to a school, educated him, gave him food, gave him clothes, gave him money, gave him medicine. So he feels beholden to them. And I was like, oh my God, this is why people become terrorists. I didn't know that. I was so dumb, but
Well, I mean, and what a great purpose for in life. If your life has no purpose, and
right,
this becomes your purpose, it gives you a
right,
reason to live.
right.
You know, whether it's a deep seated, um, difference in ideology or not is, for some people, I'm sure that's probably the case. But yeah,
That
I
was
can
Bin Laden's
totally
case. Bin Laden's was all religion. Bin Laden's a gazillionaire. That's like not his issue. His was religion.
right.
But I would say number 2 and under, a lot of them grew up in environments that like we would never understand, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, hey, this is how I'm going to eat.
Right.
This is how I'm going to stay alive. I've got
Right.
this group of guys. They're helping take care of me. Everyone, I have to do this. I have to do that. They're feeding me. All I have to do is get up every once in a while and say, yeah, rah, rah, yeah. And hopefully they don't ask me to put on a vest and walk into a crowded restaurant. That's something maybe somebody else does. Hopefully I'm just a guy that's a lookout or,
And I'm not excusing their behavior. They all
right.
deserve to like rot. I don't trust
Yeah.
me. Like, but it might help us like stop it in the future if we understand how some of these are radicalized, how some of these folks are radicalized. I think that was
Right. Um, Well, the Chinese guy that kills me because listen, the Chinese guys the triads that I've been investigating, like it's all just money. It's all just
it
money.
was not for the max.
Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that crazy?
that
They
is
were
crazy.
not paid a cent. But if you think about like some of the spies that we've had here, some of them have been paid, but some of them have not been paid. If you look at Ana Montes, who was the Cuban who was arrested on September 13th, 2001. So I think she flew under the radar. She never received a cent from the Cuban government ever for being a spy. It's
Huh.
crazy.
What about? But then, well, I was gonna say, there's Aldrich Ames and
Yes.
what was the other one? There
So
was another.
Aldrich Ames is why we have to take the lifestyle polygraph. And then every 6 months, we have a financial check done on us at CIA. And that's because of Aldrich Ames.
Yeah,
Because Aldrich Ames, so I mean, this was back in the 80s, right? So like, let's put the money in relative, but he was like a GS 14, 15, which I left at a 14. 15 is the highest you can go. You're not making a ton of money. This is like the federal government. Like, right, and he bought 2 $500,000 houses. So this was like in 1985, right? That's a lot. We're
Yeah.
looking at probably $2 million houses on just a government salary, which is, he bought 2 Jaguars. He bought 2, like,
Unless you're in Congress.
true.
I'm an excellent trader. I'm an excellent trade. I just know how to pick them.
But he is why we have to have financial checks every 6 months.
But he was definitely, well,
He was paid for sure, no
yeah,
question. The Russians tend to pay. That's different. And so was Robert Hansen, who was the FBI spy guy. I don't know
yes,
if you remember him. He was paid in diamonds by the Russians, but both of them were paid. But Ana Montes, who spied for the Cubans, was not paid, and then the Macs were not paid.
Hmm.
I mean, if you're going to do something illegal, at least get like money, right? Like I don't.
Yeah, and get out before that it, well, of course I guess they're supposed to have had bought it. They had a summer retreat for him on a river, or I'm sorry, on a lake in Russia and everything. Like it, I mean, to me, there was plenty of times you could have taken off. Like you had plenty of money, you could have taken off. But I wonder if deep down he was thinking to himself, like, I'm never going to make that. That's never going to happen. Like I'm going to get off the plane. They're going to pop me in the head.
I've watched interviews with Aldrich Ames. No, I don't think he's very, speaking of ego, I don't think I've ever seen someone with a bigger ego.
Yeah.
Like
Super arrogant.
so arrogant. It was fascinating to watch.
Yeah, but he didn't seem like he was leaving.
Mm-mm.
It wasn't like he was preparing to leave,
No, no, no.
Even though he felt he was set up over there and he had tons of money, he could have started liquidating and gone over there. My fear is, and this was the same fear when I was on the run. Everybody's like, why didn't you go to Russia? Like, if you get a couple $1 million, why don't you go to Russia? Oh, not Russia. Sorry. What am I saying? Mexico. Sorry.
Mexico.
Why don't you go to Mexico? Why don't you go to Brazil? Why don't you go? And I was like, bro, if I show up with a couple $1 million in Mexico,
They're going to know you're on the run.
right?
Everyone there is going to be like,
I was going to say, like, the cops will take it from you. It's not like you have to worry about the criminals. Like, even the police will come. You can't. There's nobody to call. I was like, then I have to live in Russia. I mean, then I have to live in Mexico. I'm like, I just, and maybe, and I've talked to people where they're like, no, there's plenty of pockets there where there's tons of American patriot or expats. You could have gone here. You could have gone. I don't know. I think I was just so arrogant. I felt like I just wasn't going to get caught.
But in my opinion, I hate to say this, I didn't feel this way about terrorists, but I felt this way about the criminals at the FBI. I do think their arrogance is what ultimately gets them caught, right?
Oh, listen, every bad decision I've made in my entire life was based on arrogance. Every single one, and has bitten me in the ass every single time. And I don't just mean from once I started doing criminal activity, the arrogance that got me involved in criminal, like
Yes.
it was from the beginning all the way through.
Interesting.
And it was only non-arrogant decisions after, and really, honestly, once I started my sentence, probably about 3-4 years into my sentence, when I started
Humbled
realizing,
you real quick.
yeah, I started thinking, you get to a point where you're bitching and moaning about being there and how you shouldn't be there and how this and that, and then, at some point you start to, well, I did, started to go, now you're supposed to be here. You know what I mean? Like, maybe you shouldn't have got 26 years. I'll give you that. That's excessive, but you definitely should be here. And then you start, I wrote a memoir, and you kind of have to do a lot of self-reflection. And you start thinking, what are the decisions that led me here? And, and if you start thinking, and all of those decisions are my fault, because that's a great way to look like, it's not because she did this or because this guy did this. No. You start taking responsibility for everybody else's actions. So, I started doing that, and I think I just fundamentally kind of had a change of heart. And I
But
think
that's so commendable that you like own that. I don't know how to say that. I just think that's really impressive that you own that. A
so
lot of people don't.
I think it's just preservation, because I watched so many people leave prison and come back
Come back. I
and
mean,
leave
our
again.
recidivism rate is like 90%.
It's
So
outrageous. It's like, what were you thinking? Like,
yes.
And they was always like, well, man, I needed money, or I needed this. I was like, well, I thought, like, we talked about this. I thought you were going to rent a spare room at somebody's house and keep your bills low. I know, but I met this chick and she had 2 kids, and it's like, well, you weren't going to date anybody. You were going to you had this whole goal, I know, but you didn't even get out of the halfway house. and you're already
Oh, no.
making these decisions to
Yeah.
get yourself back in. And so many, I spent so much time with other like con men, right? And I would listen to them, and I'm telling you right now, 90% of them were actively saying, would say, well, there's this business called reputation.com, and they can bury all of the stuff that's on you. So, so if you go to look on Google, all the articles that were written about your case,
Mhm.
they can bury it. So they're 15 or 20 pages down so nobody can find them.
That's really disturbing.
Oh yeah. So, and they can also boost things that you want. So,
Well, not for you. Like, I feel like your crimes, they're not crimes against children, right? Like, they're not,
oh, right. Yeah.
like, those are crimes I don't really want buried.
Right.
Like,
Well, I think what these guys were doing is they would start talking about all the things that they were going to do.
mhm.
And to me, as I'm listening to them, like try and get your name changed, try and hire reputation.com, hire this, hire that. And I might have the name wrong. I think it is reputation like .com. Anyway, so they would hire, like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I kept thinking, like, I feel like you're just working on your next indictment. Like, what, why are you trying to hide all this? Well, I got to get a job. I'm like, then you get a job that's acceptant of the fact that you went to prison. Oh, no, nobody will hire me. Well, I'm thinking people do hire you. I'm thinking that you go out and you start at the bottom. Well, what, I'm going to dig ditches? Yeah,
Yeah,
you're going to dig
that's
ditches.
what you're gonna do.
You do it for a little bit. It's not forever.
It's not fun,
Right.
but
Somebody will, and you climb that ladder.
right.
So I used to tell everybody I was going to work at McDonald's. And
Hey,
I was,
you gotta
and
start
I
somewhere,
listen,
dude.
I was genuinely almost disappointed that I didn't get a job at McDonald's. And instead, a friend of mine hired me to work at a gym that he owned. And I was
Oh.
like, I was really kind of wanted to be able to say I worked at McDonald's for 6 months or something. You know what I'm saying? Like I
I
had a
think you
whole
did okay.
goal. And I did. I lived in someone's spare room for 18 months.
But if
Um,
that's what you have to do to get back, to not go back, then I think
right.
that's what you have. That has to be. We have a very high recidivism rate in this country. It's one of the highest in the world, and I think that that just bodes with what you're saying, right? That everyone's going back.
Yeah. Well, I think it's twofold. I think one, they're not trying to rehabilitate anybody.
No.
There are programs, but it's really, you go to the program, you're like, I feel like this is like it's window dressing,
Mm.
for politicians or for people. And then so one, it's that, and then it's just people there. So there's no way to there very little rehabilitation.
Right.
And then you get out and there's very little help. Like
Right.
if you had a lot longer in the halfway house, and some more help in the halfway house, because I know guys that had done 10 years and they got like 3 months in a halfway house. It's like they have nobody to go out to.
It's
Well,
not a good reentry into society.
right, right. And there's very, very little forgiveness, I think, in people's hearts.
See, that's not fair. And I think even in law enforcement, you do have to have empathy to a certain degree, even at CIA in dealing with terrorists, right? You have to have empathy to a certain degree. Just because someone made a bad choice doesn't mean that they're defined by the sum of all of those choices, right?
Right. Yeah. It's a tough situation. But we'll see. Worked out for me. But yeah, a lot of these guys, like I said, they just can't conceive of the fact that they put themselves there. It's
Mm.
always somebody snitched on me, somebody did something that, oh, this is why I'm here. And it's like, okay, well, you sound like you're coming back. And like you said, most of them do come back. But uh so ultimately you retire?
Well, I mean, I just like left in good standing. Same at the
Right.
CIA. I left. I don't want to be specific because it makes me a little uncomfortable, but the sexual harassment got extremely bad to the point that I always had dinner with my dad, and he was like, "I don't understand why you're still there. This is not okay." And so I actually did file a complaint. I was really like proud of myself. There's no way to really do that. And their solution was to move me to an office 4.5 hours away, not pay my expenses until they could figure out how to resolve the complaint. And my SSA was notorious for being a sexual harasser. he shouldn't have ever still been there in the first place. Like there was just a whole, and so I just made a decision at that point in time that, you know what, it's time to quit. And it's so interesting. I almost didn't put in my book that I worked at the FBI, because sometimes when that happens to you, you feel like it's your fault, but I know it's not my fault. That's ridiculous. I know that, but I didn't want to talk about it. But I received a letter in 2019. I don't remember, from an individual with a link to the New York Times. And I clicked on the link, um, and it's a 19 women gender discrimination lawsuit against the FBI and
Mm,
against the director of Quantico.
mm.
And the new director of Quantico was someone who had made my life absolutely miserable at the time. And it didn't stop. Like clearly it didn't stop. And so that's when I decided to put it in my book too, because I think we need to have a chitty chat about
Right.
it. And then, so I left the FBI and I actually became a high school history teacher.
Okay. Which
And
was
what I
the
went to
original
college,
plan.
what?
That was the original plan.
What I went to college to do, but I put a different spin on it. I started teaching at the largest, probably most prestigious all girls school in the US. And I realized like we need to change the gender narratives like in these jobs. And so I created a class on national security, crime, and foreign policy for women only. And since then, I've had girls go into the State Department, Homeland Security, the military, the FBI, the CIA, you name it, they're there. And I'm like so excited that I could like change things from like the ground up, I
Right.
guess. I don't know. But I've since left that school and I'm happy to share my experience here because it's a criminal one if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
Um, so, I'm former CIA, former FBI. I went to that school. I was teacher of the year. Like, I mean, I had a very successful career. Let's put it that way. And I was really excited because at the school, they have like a child development center that's attached to it. And so when we had our daughter, we're like, this is great. She can go to school with me every day. Like, how cool is that? Right. She was doing great there. But when she was 3, her arm was broken by her teacher. And listen, I'm a teacher. Shit does happen. Kids break stuff on playgrounds. Like it happens,
Yeah.
right? But he lied about how it was done. And he said that he just was pushing her on the swing and that's what happened. But the orthopedist was like, no, she had too many breaks in her arm for it to just be that. And so I lodged a complaint with the school because I wasn't upset necessarily that she broke her arm. I was upset that it was lied about, if that makes any sense. Like
Right.
that was my thing. And they said, no, we're not going to fire him. Stop complaining about him. Everyone loves him. We're not going to fire him. And at that point, we weren't fully into the school year yet. We were a bit into the school year. And I was like, do I quit? Like, what do I do here? My husband's like, well, we're not in a position for you to quit. And then my daughter came home and started talking about how Mr. Jason was like locking her in the closet. And I got it on my phone.
Right.
And I called CPS again. And the school was like, why did you call CPS? We're going to make your life miserable for doing that. You shouldn't have called CPS. Not, oh my God, we're so sorry. So I
Right.
quit. And 5 months later, that teacher who I had formally complained about was let out of the school in handcuffs and is serving a 20-year prison sentence on child pornography charges.
Oh, wow.
So I have become a massive advocate about teacher hiring habits and fighting for the rights
I was
of
saying,
little.
and the warning signs are there. You're just
And
ignoring.
I think too, me being forthcoming about my story, if it can happen to me, it can happen. Like I'm former CIA, I'm former FBI. I am very security aware. And, you know, that school it costs, the tuition is $50,000 a year. This is not, this is an elite school. And if
Right.
it can happen there and if it can happen to me, I'm very much pro sharing my story, if that makes any sense. But I trust
Right.
no one. I don't
So,
trust teachers.
so I have a question. Did you one the 18 women, or well, I think you said 18.
Yeah,
Did
19.
you join 19?
No, no,
You
no.
didn't
I
join
did.
that? Okay.
No.
Mm. Oh, I was gonna say,
I
and two.
supported them, like,
Yeah.
I like gave them words of encouragement, but I wasn't interested in like suing. Like I want to help create change, but just in a different way. I support what they're doing 1,000%. I just do it a different way, if that makes sense.
Right. And what about the school? Did you ever file anything against the
I
school?
sued the shit out of the
Oh,
school.
okay. Okay. I'm assuming they settled at some point,
Nope.
or is that still going on?
4 years later, they still will not settle.
Wow. Even though it's so, that seems okay. That seems obvious, but
You would think so, especially because he's in prison. Like, this isn't even a question. Like, do you know
right.
what I mean? There's not even a question mark involved. I think they have just never had someone. This is going to sound interesting. I think people very much underestimate me. And I will not mess with people overtly, but if you wrong me, I will absolutely mess with you. And
Right.
like, I think the school is probably in a state of shock that I one talk about them to. I mean, I'm kind of a social pariah in the city that I live in because everyone loves this school so much and I did drag them through the mud. But in my opinion, that story needs to be told because parents need to be aware of like what happens and why some claims are not like brought forward. So I don't know, but I think it's definitely impacted us. We have my daughter still goes to therapy. She's going today. And so it's just it's funny because I can almost die in Afghanistan. I can get shot at and have all this stuff happen. That was the worst experience ever, which is weird.
Um, yeah. I mean, is it scheduled for trial?
Yes.
Do you know when?
Yeah, in about 6 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I say go
Uh,
for it. The way that I see it is that whether I win or lose, I feel like I will always look like I'm on the right side of history here.
right.
You really can't spin having a pedophile employed by your school and ignoring claims about it a positive way, especially when he's already been convicted and pled guilty.
Gonna be hard to get him on the stand.
I don't think they need to.
No, I know. I'm saying
Yeah,
it's
no, I
not
mean,
like you could call this guy to the stand and
no.
he'd be like, "Well, seriously, no, it didn't happen." So really, why are you in orange? Um, so
It's not a good look. But no, I've never actually litigated against anyone in my entire life, to be honest with you. I'm just not that kind of person. But this was something that I felt shouldn't be swept under the rug. And there's pretty horrible laws called, have you heard of the taking out the trash laws?
mm,
So this is to your point about the reputation .com or whatever that's called
yeah.
with teachers. So he had worked at multiple schools.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah.
And with teachers, by law, they can't say why they've been fired. And so if a school had an inkling that he was engaging in pedophilia or whatever, they could fire him. But if he hasn't been convicted of a crime, they can't tell the next school. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, to me, like, okay, here's, well, I mean, look, like you said, what is it? DCS?
CPS,
Child service.
Child
What?
Protective Services. CPS is child.
CPS.
Yeah,
I think they call it something else in Florida, but
they
uh,
might.
yeah. So anyway, I was gonna say, like, it's funny because it's like the child's protection of the child trumps even the parental rights. They'll come in, take like even just an allegation. We'll come in. Here's what we're going to do. No, I don't want to do that. You can't talk to my child. You can't. No, 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 no. We're talking to your child. We'll take your child and
Mhm.
we'll put them in foster care. If you, it's like, what are you talking about? I haven't been charged. It doesn't matter. It's so there's some things that trump the average citizen's rights, even parental rights. So to me, if it, it doesn't make sense that you're going to be working around children and you're saying, no, no, my rights trump the rights of
I
the
agree with
children.
you.
I mean,
And
so
that's why I work
that's
on
why it seems
passing
weird.
laws. I'm trying to work state by state. Some states have, I think it's Ohio, does have one in place where they will tell the next school. But yes, you're right. The argument people are making is privacy. And in my opinion, if you have engaged in pedophilia, I don't know that you have a right to privacy anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of like the priests where they're moving them from parish to parish,
Yes,
or
this is what's happening with teachers. They're moving them from, and look, I'm a teacher. Like, I do not think all teachers are bad and pedophiles. That's not what I think. But we need to re-examine these laws um, because it's not okay, in my
right.
opinion.
Yeah, I was gonna
And
say
I
that,
think he hated me. He treated my daughter very poorly, and he hated me because I think I made him nervous being FBI.
right? Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing happens with detectives. I'm not sorry, detectives, but police officers too. They'll go. It's like, okay, well, you would think somebody would say, in 5 years, this is the third or the fourth, the third you know what I'm saying, the sheriff's department you've been in, like,
Right.
you know, but they can't
Like,
really tell them why they left the last one.
right. I just think, I don't know, but yeah, that's what I work on now. And then I just got a bill passed for CIA officers to be covered for mental health care as well. I got that passed last summer, which is awesome with my senator. So
So is
that's
it
what I do now.
this is your full-time thing now?
No, my full time is I am the national security contributor to News Nation, which is
Oh,
a,
okay.
yeah, which I love. It's awesome. And then I am an adjunct professor of criminal justice
Okay. Where?
at TCU. I'm in
Okay.
Dallas. Yeah,
All right. Well, that's cool.
I
Listen,
like it.
you've got some cool gigs, right?
Yeah, I really like it.
Well, I mean, how do you feel about this? Are you okay with wrapping this up? Is there anything else you want to talk
Absolutely.
about?
No, I really enjoyed talking with you, and I really am impressed with like what you do and how you're so forthcoming. Like about, I just think that's really cool.
Okay. I was gonna say I just shoot the shit with people. I
No, I know, but you're very open and honest about your past, and I think that that is something that serves a lot of people well in terms of education, and it's good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny too because like I hear that all the time. Like where to me, I always joke around with like when guys will usually most of our stuff now is people coming in person, and you know that they'll be like, you know, so I'm talking to some guy and I'm like, honestly, I feel like I'm just back in prison in the yard shooting the shit with some
Talking to
guy, like, you know what I'm
people.
saying? Like, what happened last, you know, where there's no time limit because it's like, you know, you've got 4 or 5 hours where
Yeah,
where they're gonna let us back in the unit. It's like, so you're like, so
that's
how'd you
so
get
funny.
here? And you just keep asking questions. Well, what happened with that guy? Well, what happened when the police came? Well, I don't understand. Why did you trust that guy? You knew he lied before. So I that's what I feel like. And even when I was doing that, I remember thinking to myself, like, I wish I could get paid for this. Like, you know, because you
That's awesome.
enjoy.
Why not?
Right, because it's funny, interesting people are some of the few times that I genuinely take a real interest in other people when they have an interesting kind of when they're not it's not the norm, you know what I'm saying? It's like you don't it's not normal, like, you clearly have not had a normal life, you know
See,
what I'm
and that's
saying?
why I feel the opposite. I feel like I'm very unremarkable. So that's
Isn't
why
that funny?
when I
But
come on
that's
things
kinda
like this,
how
I'm
I
like, I don't
feel.
know why he wants to know about me. I'm not that interesting, but okay.
But, you know, it's the same thing. It's the fish in water, right? Like, the fish
True.
doesn't know he's surrounded by water. Like, you don't understand, you know, the environment you're in because it just seems so natural to you
It's
at the beginning.
normal.
Right, right.
Well, I hope
Um,
this was okay.
no, this was great. This was
Okay,
great. What
good.
is the name of your book?
Oh, yeah, my book is called The Unexpected Spy, and then that's also my Instagram and TikTok handle, as well.
The Unexpected. So that's kind of, you know, the Bustamante, you know, the everyday spy. You know,
Mine's The Unexpected Spy, and I think it's my husband came up with it, and I think
okay.
that that's good. But
Um,
it's been out for, gosh, 4 years now?
okay.
Yeah.
Good. And it's available what, on Amazon? You can just click on
Everywhere,
it?
Amazon, Target, some
Cool.
independent bookstores still have it. Wherever.
All right. Well, that is cool. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So can
Thanks
you
for
do
having me.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do me a favor if you like the video, please share the video. Please click on the like button, hit the bell so you get notified of videos just like this. Leave me a comment in the comment section. And also, we are going to leave Tracy's book link for Amazon in the description box and any social media that she gives me. I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you very much. See ya.